Being the most feared villain in history is a tough gig. The legendary necromancer Archimond is finally facing his own inevitable messy end on the battlefield. A holy sword through the heart is a pretty definitive way to end a 10-year war. The soldiers finally finished him. The continent has spent a decade terrified of the man known as the Devil. Archimond is struggling to stay upright while his armor is practically held together by blades. He knows his time is up, but he is not going out gracefully. It took an entire coalition of elite forces just to get within striking distance. He prepared for every scenario, but he still got completely outplayed in the end. The guy responsible for this mess is Berkel Rhineland, the hero leading the Northern Knights. Berkel stands tall over his defeated enemy, but Archimond has a few final words. He admits that while Berkel landed the hit, it took an entire army to get there. Berkel wants to wrap this up and start talking about peace for the entire continent. Archimond clearly has zero interest in listening to the hero preach about his virtues. He calls out the hypocrisy of knights who ignored the plague while claiming the moral high ground. He's staring down his executioner with pure unadulterated hatred for the entire order. He views every single one of these knights as a lying hypocrite who deserves to suffer. Before he hits the dirt for good, he swears to take as many of them with him. The soldiers realize he is not done fighting. Even with a fatal wound, he is actively channeling dark magic to keep the slaughter going. The scarred warrior screams for a finishing blow, but the pale figure shuts him down. 20 million lives lost to the plague were twisted into a mindless army of the dead. Berkel is not buying the moral grandstanding for even a single second of this confrontation. The enemy calls out his personal connection to the tragedy and his thirst for revenge. Berkel stays silent under the falling snow while the adversary bets everything on his motive. He ignores the accusations because he only has one singular purpose left in this fight. He readies his glowing blade with the weight of the next generation on his shoulders. A sudden paralysis hits him just as he realizes his body is failing to respond. He is desperate to pass his convictions and his fading hope down to the kids. He catches his own bloodied reflection in the knight's eyes and sees the stark contrast. The knight acts with the self-righteous glow of a man fighting for his own legacy. Berkel collapses onto the frozen ground as his strength finally abandons his ruined, broken legs. The victor stands over his prey and gives the final order to end the fight. A blade drops toward his neck while the knight demands his very last dying words. He stares back through the blood and shadows, knowing that necromancers are hard to kill. Dark tendrils lash out as the executioner swings his sword down to end the war. The knight descends with his weapon raised high against the backdrop of the crumbling battlefield. The cheers erupt across the field as the announcement of his death rings out loud. His severed head hits the ground as he registers the finality of his own demise. The soldiers celebrate the end of a 10-year war and the fall of the devil. Archimond the necromancer thought that was the end of his long and bloody story, but instead of total darkness, he finds himself reborn inside a massive, glowing estate. A couple of maids hover over a crib, whispering about the young lord waking up. The former dark mage finds himself trapped in the tiny, helpless body of an infant. The staff dotes on the baby, constantly reminding him that his name is Klein now. They shove a portrait of the Duchess in his face, insisting she is his mother. His body is stiff and awkward, but the maids keep pestering him to say mama. He forces out a pathetic sound just to get them to stop their constant chirping. The maids lose their minds, clearly shocked that the baby can actually talk already. But while they coo, he mentally tries to summon his old minions from the void. He screams for his undead army to obey, but nothing happens in this new world. Time skips forward 15 years, leaving the necromancer stuck in his new noble life. Now a teenager, Klein walks through the grounds while the local women gawk at him. They whisper about his silver hair and striking looks as he passes by the crowd. Everyone treats this kid like a literal masterpiece sent down by the gods themselves. He maintains a cold and stoic expression, completely detached from all the unwanted attention. The ladies keep swooning, wondering aloud how he manages to look so incredibly perfect today. He just ignores the chatter, trying to keep his head down and his secrets hidden. That peace does not last long, though, as someone dumps a bucket of water on him. A scarred guy stands over him, screaming that he needs to banish the evil spirit. Priest Garrison stares down our lid, convinced he just saw the face of Archimond. He claims the 3 girls nearby were charmed and needed his timely holy purification. Klein is not having it and calls out the priest for his constant, nonsensical ritual routine. The priest insists that Archimond's soul is still trapped inside and requires regular cleansing sessions. Garrison douses him again, claiming the reaction proves he is dealing with the ancient enemy. Drenched and freezing, the kid just stares at him, wondering if the guy is actually insane. He walks away muttering to himself, trying to cope with this absolute lunatic of a priest. Garrison is not done yet and orders his 2 goons to seize the boy right now. The priest demands a naked holy water bath, forcing Klein to run while screaming his name. Klein pauses to reflect, realizing his current situation is nothing like he ever imagined possible. He remembers dying for real back then, falling through a void before waking up elsewhere. He woke up in a baby's body and accidentally recited a necromantic formula, sealing his fate. That mistake got him labeled a demon and locked in a monastery at 3 years old. That was when he first met the man who would become his permanent, shadows-casting nightmare. The priest started acting nice, but Klein soon realized that was only the very beginning. His life became a non-stop loop of the priest chanting prayers over his bed all night. Then came the frozen garlic baths, leaving him shivering in a tub of ice and stench. He even had to endure being tied to a burning cross while the guy prayed calmly. He spent years suffering through every bizarre torture method the priest could invent for his purification. Now 5 years have passed, and he is just sitting there completely exhausted and totally defeated. Eren kneels and prays for Klein to finally overcome his curse and become a hero. A ritual continues as a voice drones on while Klein wears a ridiculous party hat. Klein snaps under the pressure and flings the hat away in a fit of rage. Eren is left stunned by the outburst while Klein stands there in complete cold silence. The guilt hits Klein immediately and he apologizes to his maid for his sudden temper. He decides to retrieve the hat, realizing it was actually a gift from Priest Garrison. Klein stoops down to pick up the fabric off the floor while Eren watches him. He freezes the moment he touches the material, realizing something is terribly wrong with it. Garrison chooses this exact moment to walk into the room and address the young lord. The priest beams with pride, claiming he spent a whole week knitting the damn thing. Klein shreds the hat in his hands, flatly telling the priest he is not wearing it. He lets out a frustrated yell, cursing the priest for turning his guilt into a joke. Dunkel arrives then, stepping in to ask if the long purification process is finally over. The knight mentions that the rumors about Klein being an evil spirit died years ago. As Dunkel tries to move on, Klein lunges forward and grabs the man by the face. The knight steps aside, but Garrison slams his hand down and demands the commander's attention. Klein is left pinned down while the two men ignore him completely to talk shop. Garrison turns to leave, clearly pleased with how well he is playing this social game. The priest pauses at the door and glances back to add one final chilling remark. He warns there is always a chance of a relapse, leaving Klein trapped in his shadow. The priest leaves with a reminder about his next ritual, but Klein just wants him gone. Left alone in the main hall, Klein struggles to catch his breath after the encounter. He sinks into the furniture and curses under his breath, clearly fed up with everything. Sitting there, he starts questioning if that guy is even a real priest or just a sadist. The maid breaks the tension by asking if he is truly done with his past identity. He dismisses the name Archimond entirely, making it clear he never wants to hear it again. Privately, Klein knows he is trapped and needs to recover before the priest breaks him further. His mind drifts to his 7 years locked in a monastery under the constant church watch. Back in the present, the maid notes the priest is actually an agent with a specific agenda. Klein pauses, wondering what kind of status or power an agent actually holds in this world. The stoic attendant standing nearby just hums, ready to clarify the hierarchy for his young lord. He pulls out a book, explaining that agents are the heavy hitters of the Holy Order. He notes that beyond the Duke himself, no one in their bloodline can actually challenge him. The maid is impressed by the family reputation, while the attendant asks for more inquiries. Klein, feeling the pressure, asks who the absolute strongest figure in their history really is. The attendant confirms the first Duke still holds the title as the family peak. Klein stammers in disbelief, trying to reconcile that legacy with the current 7th Duke. He whispers to himself, finally acknowledging that the first ancestor remains the undisputed powerhouse. The attendant watches him closely, taking in the weight of his sudden realization. They finish the talk, with the maid convinced that the first Duke is Klein's favorite hero. Klein sits there thinking how ridiculous it is that everyone assumes he idolizes the guy. It has been 2 centuries since the first Duke established this entire family legacy. 200 years is a long time for a grudge to stay buried in history. He finally has to accept the reality that he used to be the Necromancer Archimond. Every single portrait on the wall represents a generation of his own killer's bloodline. That hero in the painting is Berkel Reinlant, the man who ended his previous life. The irony is suffocating because he is now a descendant of his own executioner. He still remembers the final moments before death when he screamed out that name. Back then, his entire motivation was focused on securing a future for the children. He was willing to burn the world down to protect what mattered to him. The traumatic memories of his past life snap him awake in the middle of the night. He sits in the darkness trying to catch his breath after that vivid nightmare. Living as the legendary devil of the continent feels like a sick cosmic joke. He nearly wiped out the entire world in a blind rage before it all ended. Then the Northern Knight arrived and put a sword through his chest to finish him. Now he is stuck in this body with all those memories and an annoying hair color. A voice cuts through the silence as someone watches him from the bedroom doorway. It is Priest Garrison, a total lunatic who has spent years torturing him for answers. Klein has to keep his guard up and play dumb to survive this guy's presence. Suddenly, a girl barges in claiming she heard every word he muttered while sleeping. Eren is acting out some world-ending fantasy while Klein tries to keep her quiet. Butler Berkman interrupts to remind them about the upcoming swordsmanship demonstration they need to attend. Berkman is clearly worried about the young lord needing more purification after that chaotic display. Klein shuts her up with a hand over her mouth before things get even weirder. Things are definitely heating up as he deals with the looming shadow of that priest. He's headed toward this demonstration with a lot of questions about why he was invited. The butler confirms that the Duke himself specifically requested his presence at the event today. Klein questions his father's sudden interest while Eren just wants a snack from his hand. Berkman tries to scold her for being rude, but Klein tells him to take it easy. She ends up getting the cookie anyway and seems pretty happy about the whole arrangement. Klein is still trying to figure out why his father is suddenly dragging him out here. It turns out the family is hosting a bunch of relatives from the collateral branches. Dealing with extended family is the last thing he needs right now given his situation. A group of snobby nobles spots him and immediately starts making fun of his name. They are clearly mocking him by using his supposed title just to get a laugh. His own cousins show up to stir the pot by bringing up his time in the monastery. A few more distant relatives from the northern branch are just treating the place like a buffet. Then there is the group from the west who seem to be watching everything go down. One woman in particular stands out as she observes the entire scene from the sidelines. Someone in the crowd is getting impatient and wonders if he is actually ignoring them. A couple of guys from the side branches start throwing their weight around, questioning his status. They demand respect for their rank, but he hits back, wondering why they think they're family. He does not even know these nobodies, realizing they only act tough because the family is crumbling. It's clear that even a direct descendant is nothing to them now, so he decides to spar. Steel clashes immediately as he engages his opponent in a high-speed exchange of strikes. Dalton is losing his cool, screaming insults while struggling to keep up with the pace. He's getting desperate, begging for a real fight because he can't handle being toyed with. The gap in skill is already massive, but Dalton refuses to accept that it's over. Delane stands there perfectly calm, playing the role of the family's final, desperate hope. As the resident genius prodigy, he just offers a polite apology for the inevitable outcome. The family's entire reputation as legendary swordsmen rests on his shoulders alone today. Dalton is not backing down, launching himself forward for one final, reckless attempt at glory. Something shifts as a mystical purple light flickers in Delane's eyes, revealing a new perspective. He strikes with surgical precision, leaving his opponent completely frozen and unable to react. The sheer technical gap is enough to shut Dalton up for good in this fight. Moving with blinding speed, Delane leaves trails of energy that make his opponent lose his footing. He's locked in, realizing that his perception has reached an entirely different level of clarity. Every bit of footwork and timing becomes obvious to him as he tracks the incoming attacks. Dalton can feel the massive difference in their skill levels, and he's clearly starting to panic. With the mana flow mapped out, Delane prepares to unleash the family's ultimate hidden technique. The meteor sword hits with enough raw power to end the fight instantly. The match is officially over and the arena is left buzzing with residual mana. Delane stays cool, rubbing it in that his opponent never really stood a chance. The crowd is losing their minds because using that technique publicly is a major flex. Klein is left reeling as his eyes act up, realizing this was a blunt show of force. The massive chandelier draws everyone's attention before a voice breaks the silence by calling out. Klein turns to find his brother, who acts like he just casually wandered into the hall. Delane plays it off with a grin, claiming he would have shown off even more if he knew. While the world sees a golden boy, Klein is just focused on why the collateral branch showed up. As they talk about money, the Duke himself finally steps in to address his star pupil. The head of the family looks on, clearly impressed that Delane has already mastered their secret art. Delane immediately snaps to attention, recognizing the man who holds the reins of their entire house. The Duke keeps his gaze fixed on his son, offering rare validation for all his hard work. It is obvious that for the Duke, Delane is the only thing keeping the family legacy alive. Nearby, onlookers are stunned by the sheer level of talent and precision on display here today. Delane keeps his head down and stays humble, acting like he still has plenty to learn. The Duke reminds everyone of the first patriarch's decree that a Rhineland knight must always lead. He tells Delane to keep those words at the center of everything he does from now on. The atmosphere shifts instantly when the Duke turns his cold, sharp gaze toward the younger brother. Klein freezes up, completely caught off guard now that he is finally in his father's sights. The Duke rests a heavy hand on his son's head, making his disappointment crystal clear. He coldly confirms that the boy possesses absolutely no mana, effectively writing him off entirely. Klein apologizes while realizing that in his father's eyes he is nothing but a worthless burden. A subordinate tries to offer an excuse about the monastery, but the Duke remains completely silent. The crowd begins to whisper, mocking the second son for his lack of talent and potential. They start questioning if the direct bloodline is even fit to lead the family anymore. Klein ignores the insults, his mind fixated on Burkle's past words about children being the future. Those words now feel like a dark, sick joke given the current state of the house. Klein seethes, wondering if this pathetic display is truly what the family sacrificed everything to protect. His relatives walk away with a smirk, leaving him completely isolated in the middle of everything. His cousin Dalton steps up to rub salt in the wound, mocking his inability to fight. Dalton calls him a total disgrace and insults his status as a direct descendant of Rhineland. Klein realizes this guy is just another collateral branch parasite who spends his time seducing women. When Klein calls him out on his secret affairs, Dalton is clearly caught off guard. Dalton starts to lose his cool, but Klein cuts the conversation short with a sudden move. With a clean sweep, Klein slams his cousin face first into the ground without a second thought. Dalton recovers enough to scream that Klein is just lashing out because he lost to Delane. He pushes his luck even further by mocking Klein's lack of a mother and his status. Klein's demeanor shifts instantly, his eyes burning with a dark, dangerous intent as he demands clarification. Dalton realizes he pushed too far and instantly freezes in terror as the atmosphere turns lethal. Klein realizes his cousin's insults are not just about his mother, but a deeper, pathetic display of arrogance. He wonders how a once great bloodline managed to sink into such a shallow pool of losers. It makes no sense for the family of the very hero who killed him to act this way. A man steps in to intercept the confrontation and orders Dalton to back off immediately. The man makes it clear that he will not stand for any more of Dalton's disrespect. Dalton is forced to swallow his pride and clicks his tongue in pure impotent rage. The man fires back, calling Dalton out for hiding behind his knight like a total coward. Dalton stomps off, shouting back at the onlookers to mind their own business for once. Klein's hand locks onto the hilt of a sword with a grip of iron. The knight who provided the blade watches him with an unreadable, stoic expression. The man turns to his comrade Dunkel and asks if there is a spare sword available. They head out into the dark, misty clearing to settle things away from prying eyes. The man hands the weapon over, handing the silver-haired youth the tool he requested. When asked why he needs a blade so late at night, Klein just gives a vague answer. He mimics the movements from the duel, wondering if he has the meteor sword technique down. Klein tells the knight to head out while he stays behind to practice his swing solo. The knight figures he's just dwelling on the loss, but he's missing the bigger picture. He knows Klein lacks the mana to be a knight, let alone master a secret art. Even if he could mimic the physical path of the blade, copying the technique should be impossible. Klein shuts his eyes, finding that every detail of the fight is still playing back with perfect clarity. He focuses entirely on the footwork, breaking down the sequence with surgical precision. Every step and lunge must align perfectly with the timing of the launch. Mastering the trajectory of the blade requires a complete grip on his mana flow. The energy crackles as he pushes his focus to the absolute limit. A bystander nearby catches a sudden spike in power and immediately starts sweating. He recognizes the signature of that energy and can barely process what he is seeing. The strike connects with the stone, shattering it into pieces from the raw force. His eyes shift as that supernatural state fully activates within him. He stands still for a moment, letting the residual mana fade away from his body. The witness remains frozen in place, watching the aftermath in total silence. His attendants approach him, clearly rattled by the sudden display of power. He wipes the sweat away, still struggling to believe that the technique actually worked. A girl watches from a distance, stunned by the sheer scale of the blast. The scarred man monitors the situation, recognizing that something has fundamentally shifted. Nearby, a bucket of water begins to bubble violently as if it were boiling. The man points out that he can hold his breath underwater for over a minute. He surfaces, annoyed that the purification ritual took even longer than it usually does. Someone mocks the ominous energy they sensed earlier, despite his obvious frustration with the training. The girl hands him a towel while he wonders why he had to endure that torture. Suddenly, a messenger arrives with a formal invitation sent directly from Lord Dalton. Klein wipes the sweat away as the messenger mentions an apology from Lord Dalton. He's clearly blindsided because he knows exactly how dangerous that guy really is. He keeps his guard up while looking over the letter for any hidden traps. A hunting contest invite right after a public brawl is definitely a setup for murder. He knows it is a lure but decides that turning it down is not an option. Klein tells his companion that he basically has no choice but to accept the challenge. He glances at his gear because he needs to be ready for whatever comes next. That blade is his ace in the hole for when things inevitably go south today. He has been testing his limits and finally realized the true extent of his growth. He can perfectly replicate any combat technique after seeing it performed just one single time. He proves it by obliterating a boulder with a move he just picked up recently. His scarred partner watches the display of power with a look of deep, silent calculation. Klein confirms the plan and tells him to prep the carriage for their little hunt. When the red-haired girl tries to tag along, he immediately shuts that entire idea down. He reminds her that he already warned her about how dangerous this trip would be. Their ally is starting to get a really bad vibe about how today is going. The carriage rolls toward the castle while the dread continues to build for the team. They hit a massive bump in the road that sends a jolt through the whole cabin. The girl is clearly not handling the rough ride well as they head toward the danger. Their ally sighs and hands her a pillow, still annoyed that she even joined them. Klein notes the western forest is way too rugged for anyone unprepared to navigate. He tells his scarred companion to catch some sleep before they reach their destination. The old man gets sentimental, but Klein clarifies the pillow was strictly for Aaron. Klein stares out the carriage window as the ride continues to shake the cabin. He realizes the entire landscape has undergone some massive changes over the years. Once a frozen wasteland of corpses, the area is now surprisingly lush and green. He keeps his gaze sharp, taking in every detail of the transformed battlefield area. It is clear to him that Burkle is responsible for this sudden environmental shift. A guard interrupts his thoughts to announce they have finally arrived at their destination. They pull up to the massive, sprawling grounds of the infamous Conwell estate itself. Klein steps out and wonders if this is where Dalton has been hiding out. The place is even more extravagant than the main house of the Three Greats. It is ridiculous how much cash they are blowing on a simple hunting competition. Someone shouts his name, cutting through the noise of the busy estate grounds. Dalton appears with a pack of snarling, muscular dogs straining against their heavy leashes. He mocks Klein about the mansion, bragging that their money came from his family. Dalton sneers that 7 years in a monastery left Klein clueless about the world. Klein notices the hounds are completely emaciated and clearly not treated very well here. Dalton laughs at Klein's impatience and claims the whole trap is already set up. He gestures for his rival to pay attention while he initiates the next move. Dalton signals his goons that the real hunt begins right now. He has already littered the mountainside with raw bait to lure his targets. Those starved dogs have a sense of smell that makes them perfect tracking weapons. Dalton readies his bow with a grin, waiting for the dogs to find the scent. One dog is hit mid-stride before it even gets a chance to reach the bait. The pack is getting picked off by arrows while Dalton laughs at the carnage. He stands there gloating, clearly thinking he is the smartest person in the room. A young maid approaches and he immediately shifts his focus toward her. He recognizes her as Klein's pet and his tone turns condescending instantly. Dalton sneers, wondering why Klein even bothers keeping such a small brat around. He grabs her by the wrist, forcing her into his space with hostile intent. Klein steps in and catches his wrist, making it clear that he should let go. He puts enough pressure on the bully's arm to make it obvious he means business. The two of them lock into a tense standoff, neither one backing down an inch. Klein shoves him back, leaving the agitated bully scrambling to keep his composure. A boot hits the stirrup, signaling that the games are moving to the next phase. Dalton mounts up and shouts for Klein to follow him into the trap. Klein orders the maid to stay behind with Aaron and stay out of the woods. He is handed a mysterious scroll marked with a glowing yellow crest. It is a magic signal scroll that triggers alert without needing any mana. Klein points out the priest, telling his companion that if he goes missing, it is officially go time. He explains the mechanics of the signal scroll and how the crest will mark his hand. Without another word, he takes off on his horse, leaving his companion behind to worry. Dalton watches him ride off, his face tight as the weight of the plan settles in. A sharp, sudden movement cuts through the quiet, marking the start of the ambush. Klein pushes his horse through the dark woods, banking on catching Dalton on this trail. He pulls the reins to a halt as a voice breaks the silence, greeting him by name. Dalton drops the act, crouching in the shadows with his blade already pulled and ready. Klein dismounts, scanning the area and demanding to know exactly what is going on here. His confusion turns to immediate alarm as he takes in the sight on the ground. Two slaughtered dogs lie in the grass, turning this confrontation into something much more lethal. Dalton shifts his stance, clarifying that this hunt has reached its final, violent chapter. He makes his intention clear, confirming that Klein is the final target on his list. Dalton plans to deliver Klein's head to Delane as a brutal message to the family. He spits insults at the Rhineland name, calling the whole bloodline a pathetic, powerless joke. With a quick signal, he calls his hidden archers out from the cover of the trees. The archers draw back their strings while Dalton mocks Klein for his family's supposed weakness. Klein listens to the taunts, his expression shifting from shock into a cold, hard focus. Dalton relishes the thought of the headlines, mocking the idea of a fallen northern family. As Dalton promises to feed him to the dogs, Klein's gaze turns into pure icy rage. Klein just shrugs it off, claiming this whole mess is for the children's future. Dalton can't help but let out a mocking, dismissive scoff at the ridiculous statement. The mockery turns into wild, uncontrolled laughter that seems to drown out the entire area. Dalton is honestly rattled now, wondering if his target has finally snapped under the pressure. Klein just keeps laughing, his posture shifting into something far more dangerous and cold. Both men lock eyes and the air turns heavy as Klein calls him a brat. The confidence drains right out of Dalton, replaced by a sudden, sharp spike of terror. Klein reminds him that his family legacy was built on the price of his death. He stands there completely unfazed, wrapped in a strange and swirling aura of blue energy. Dalton stares at the blood-red sky, stammering about how someone without mana could do this. Klein cuts him off, revealing this is not standard magic, but something far more demonic. The attackers are starting to panic, realizing they have no idea what they are dealing with. One of them stares in total disbelief, repeating the words demonic energy like a curse. Klein starts a rhythmic chant, pulling on ancient souls buried deep within the past. He levitates above the ground, commanding those forgotten forces to return to the light. Skeletal figures start clawing their way into reality, ready to feed on anything nearby. Dalton watches the impossible unfold, finally piecing together the true identity of his enemy. He screams out the name Archimonde as the army of the dead surrounds them all. With a sharp gesture, Klein unleashes his legion to devour every single one of them. He watches the carnage, realizing he thought he had forgotten how to use this power. 2 centuries have passed since this power was last unleashed upon the world. Those years have faded into a blur of distant, forgotten memories for him now, yet he can still feel the endless resonance pulsing through the deep, dark abyss. The voices of the dead are finally calling out to him from the void. He can feel the rhythm and the pulse of that long-lost, ancient memory returning. Clenching his hand, he pulls the shadows together to embrace that nostalgic sensation again. His enemies realize the gravity of the situation as total terror sets in. They find themselves completely surrounded by these glowing-eyed, hooded skeletal warriors. He smirks, confirming that Archimonde is indeed the name he once went by. The attackers struggle to process whether he is a real threat or just hearsay. They stare up at the looming, shadowy figure standing right behind their target. A hooded skeleton fixes its glowing orange gaze directly onto the terrified soldiers. The sheer scale of the army leaves the opposition completely frozen in stunned silence. They try to laugh it off, mocking the bizarre appearance of the bone-clad soldiers. The youth remains stone-faced, questioning their dismissive label of his army as mere trash. The soldiers boast about how easily they have crushed similar enemies during past missions. They decide to treat the skeletons as trophies, planning to take them as souvenirs. Confident in their numbers, the group draws their weapons to clear the path forward. They order the archers to advance while the rest of the squad breaks through. Unfazed, the Necromancer prepares his defense by ordering his ranged units to take aim. The hooded archer locks onto his target and prepares to release the tension. He shouts the order and the entire squad launches a synchronized volley of arrows. A thick cloud of projectiles blocks out the sky like a sudden, deadly rainstorm. The arrows swarm toward the guy in blue who does not even bother to move. He watches the incoming rain with a calm gaze that shows he saw this coming. The volley thuds into the ground around him, kicking up dust as they all land. The leader sneers and laughs with his crew, already assuming their target is finished off. His smug expression vanishes in a split second when he realizes the attack failed completely. The arrows stop dead in midair as a strange, glowing energy hums in the air. Skeletons step out of the shadows, each holding a glowing shield that tanked the entire volley. The Necromancer just smiles because nobody remembers the true potential of his 200-year-old army. One of the soldiers loses his mind, screaming about how these things should not have shields. He tells the panicked Burkle that his surprise is natural if he only knows basic skeletons. His tone turns cold and dangerous as he promises that his own army is different. He keeps his eyes on Burkle and orders the first defensive formation to drop back. He thinks about the betrayal he suffered and orders every single unit to prepare for combat. With a final vow to crush them himself, he screams the command to charge forward. The skeletal front line breaks into a sprint, moving with a speed that defies all logic. Burkle watches the wall of bones rush toward him and completely loses his composure. The soldiers scream as they realize these things can run just before the horde hits. The commander screams for order, but his men are already losing their grip on the front line. One guard takes a blade straight to the chest and goes down without a chance to fight. The skeleton army cuts through the ranks like a hot knife through butter, leaving nothing but chaos. The remaining soldiers realize they are completely outmatched as the carnage spreads across the entire field. While the commander rages at his unit to hold, a new order rings out from the shadows. The soldiers look up just as the archers lock onto their positions from the canopy above. The skeleton squad readies their gear, turning the forest into a literal killing box for the survivors. Panic fully sets in as they realize they are trapped in a crossfire with nowhere to run. The command to fire echoes through the trees, signaling the end for anyone left standing. A hail of bolts tears through the air, moving far too fast for the soldiers to dodge. The volley hits home, turning the retreat into an absolute bloodbath as the unit gets shredded. The remnants of the squad drop where they stand, pinned down by the relentless rain of arrows. A lone soldier tries to hold his ground against a lunging skeleton, his hands shaking in terror. He stares at the creature in disbelief, realizing these are not the mindless fodder he expected to fight. Desperate to survive, the commander orders his men to dump their crossbows and switch to melee. He screams for his men to listen, completely unaware that a monster is closing in behind him. The commander locks eyes with his attacker, his voice cracking as he prepares for a final stand. He lunges forward with a desperate roar, pouring every ounce of his remaining strength into the strike. The blade connects perfectly, sending the skeleton's skull flying through the air to hit the dirt. He laughs in relief, convinced he has finally found the weakness to turn the tide of battle. That massive blade cuts through the air with a vacuum arc that catches the man off guard. He gasps in disbelief because he thought decapitating the thing would end the fight for good. Archimonde just smirks at his victim, clearly enjoying the fact that his warning went completely ignored. The headless soldier stands perfectly still because these skeletons play by an entirely different set of rules. It reaches down to grab its own skull, the embers in its eyes glowing with a renewed intensity. This self-reconstruction is the exact reason why Archimonde was able to conquer the entire continent so easily. The soldier is drenched in sweat, staring in absolute horror as the creature reattaches its own head. A piercing screech echoes through the air as the skeleton prepares for another round of brutal combat. The survivors are losing their nerve, especially since these monsters actually fight with real military tactical formations. Surrounded by a growing army of glowing-eyed undead, the soldiers scream out in total, hopeless despair. Archimonde stays calm, mentioning that his current limit for this specific body is only 11 skeletons. He asks if they want to keep playing while the soldiers around him start to lose it. The scene shifts to a quiet garden fountain where someone is laughing at the chaos unfolding elsewhere. A scarred man tells a maid that this is all just a story from the master's monastery days. The girl claps and laughs, finding the tales of the young master's past exploits to be incredibly amusing. The man smiles warmly, noting that she seems to have a lot of genuine fondness for him. She pouts at the observation but quickly admits that she is indeed very loyal to the master. She insists he is amazing, though the scene cuts to a soldier begging for his life in terror. The victim is literally dying, yet in his panic he keeps gasping out how kind the master is. Archimonde strikes him down with a glowing beam, proving that the victim's words and the reality are worlds apart. The victim keeps babbling about how his master shares cookies like they are best friends. It is a stark contrast to the blood-soaked reality our guy is dealing with right now. Things get messy as the frontline fighters start losing ground to these endless skeletal soldiers. Klein is pushing himself to the absolute limit just to hold the line against them. He channels his frustration into a single massive swing that clears a path through the dark. It turns out these bone bags have a nasty habit of pulling themselves back together after a hit. He realizes that unless he finds a way to stop the regeneration, this fight is pointless. Taking a look from above, he spots the brat pulling the strings of this entire undead army. He starts carving through the swarm with everything he has to reach the source of the magic. With no time to waste, he launches himself into the air for one final heavy strike. He is done playing around with these corpses and makes his intentions to end this very clear. He brings the blade down with absolute intent to finish this once and for all. His eyes flare with a strange violet power as he locks onto the target's core weakness. That surge of energy flowing through his hand is clearly the secret weapon he needed. He starts tapping into a technique he witnessed earlier, hoping he can pull it off perfectly. It turns out to be a secret move belonging to the prestigious Rhineland family line. A streak of purple light tears through the battlefield as he executes the powerful meteor sword. Dalton is left reeling in the dirt, realizing he is about to pay the ultimate price today. Klein looms over his broken opponent, ready to deliver a verdict that has been a long time coming. The fight is officially over, and now it is time for Dalton to face the music. It turns out Archimond fell because his necromancy had one fatal flaw that left him exposed. But Klein finds a strange, ironic twist in that classic weakness. He's now wielding the very same demonic energy that Archimond once mastered. It is wild that his stolen Rhineland abilities are the only thing keeping that power stable. He realizes that feeding on the blood of his enemies has only made him stronger. Dalton is barely hanging on, wondering what kind of madness Klein is actually spouting. He barely has the strength to ask what could possibly be driving this obsession. His vision starts to fade as the reality of his defeat finally sets in. Klein looms over him, already setting his sights on the next target, Burkle. He is dead set on rebuilding the fallen house he has inherited from the ashes. Dalton groans as he drifts into a state of semi-consciousness. He wakes up in a void of total darkness, completely disoriented and unable to see. He realizes he is bound in heavy shackles, trapped in some kind of chair. A sudden spark of awareness hits him as he realizes he is no longer free. An armored figure steps out of the shadows to greet him in this prison. It turns out this is a custom-made afterlife designed specifically by the Master Archimond. Dalton is losing his mind trying to process the fact that he is essentially dead. The figure starts listing off his sins, specifically his history of abusing defenseless dogs. He recounts the sick joy Dalton took in hunting and torturing animals for sport. Dalton screams in denial, demanding the figure stop this nonsense before he loses it completely. Dalton is starting to realize that something is seriously wrong with his current reality. He remembers the exact moment Klein's blade tore through him, leaving him for dead. The afterlife voice confirms his suspicion, explaining that he is merely paying back his karmic debt. Dalton is not buying any of this afterlife talk, desperately pleading for his release from this nightmare. The glowing figure shuts him down, making it clear that his personal belief does not change the truth. A pack of spectral hounds emerges from the shadows to collect on his long list of sins. The physical toll of his judgment begins to manifest, hitting him with waves of intense pain. The figure cuts through the noise, ordering him to pay attention to the surrounding atmosphere. He is forced to confront the echoes of every single life he cruelly ended in the past. As the hounds close in, the figure reminds him that this misery is entirely self-inflicted. It turns out he built this exact version of hell with every wicked choice he made. The weight of his actions finally breaks him, drawing a guttural scream from the depths of hell. He tries to beg for mercy, but his pleas for salvation fall on completely deaf ears. Every drop of sweat and tear only emphasizes the total collapse of his pathetic existence. Dalton ends up broken on the ground, finally silenced by the weight of his own karma. Klein stands over the wreckage, completely unbothered by the miserable state of his former enemy. The swordsman maintains his cold, professional composure while watching his opponent finally fade away. Klein turns his attention toward the restless spirits who helped him carry out this final judgment. He acknowledges their service, deciding it is time to settle the score by granting them their release. With a flick of his wrist, he breaks their curse and lets these long-bound souls finally find peace. Glowing blue particles drift through the darkness like embers in the wake of his magic. Klein stands alone in the center of the void, surrounded by the fading remnants of souls. He stares down in silence, turning over the weight of what he just accomplished in his mind. The bodies on the ground remind him that death is usually final, so why is he still here? A hooded figure emerges from the mist, calling him out for using necromancy right to his face. Klein realizes his secret was witnessed and immediately demands to know exactly who is standing there. The stranger ignores the question, casually tossing a glowing green orb of energy in his hand. He claims that Klein has no business knowing his identity because he will not be around that long. Green mist begins to swirl around the fallen bodies, forcing them to rise against their own wills. The unnatural light in their eyes reveals the terrifying power this stranger is holding over them now. The necromancer stands tall, commanding a small army of shambling corpses to do his bidding for him. Klein recognizes the technique immediately as soul return magic, and he knows exactly how dangerous it is. The stranger brushes off Dalton's failure, deciding these puppets are more than enough to handle the job. A mocking laugh echoes across the mountain peaks, signaling that things are about to get real bad. Back at the estate, a maid tries to engage Dunkel with some lighthearted stories about the young master. Dunkel is clearly distracted, blowing her off to focus on the urgent problem currently in his hands. He stares at an emergency signal scroll, wondering why Klein would take such a heavy tool along. 3 hours have passed with zero communication from the forest, and his gut tells him something is wrong. He moves to mount his horse, but two men rush over to block his path, yelling for him. They demand he stay at his post, insisting the hunting competition takes priority over his growing concern. Dunkel narrows his eyes while calculating the potential trap sitting right in front of him. Those blue capes belong to the Corwell family, which means these are definitely Dalton's men. He is not playing around anymore, pulling rank as the Knight Commander to clear his path immediately. The weight of his authority hangs in the air as he demands they step aside. Faced with a real commander, the guards realize they are way out of their depth. He tells Aaron to head back to the estate because he has to track down the master. He urges her to leave with the priest while he handles the situation in the woods. The guards reveal the priest already vanished, and they have no idea where he went. That priest's sudden departure confirms Dunkel's worst fears about the emergency scroll he was holding. He curses his luck and jumps onto his horse, desperate to reach the forest in time. It is clear now that the timing of these events was never just a coincidence. He gallops toward the danger, knowing for certain that something terrible is happening to Klein. Meanwhile, a hooded figure is leading an entire squad of undead toward the lone boy. Klein realizes he is out of luck since his last fight completely wiped out his energy. A low, monstrous growl vibrates through the field, signaling the enemies are closing in fast. The hooded leader pushes the undead forward, worried that their stolen bodies are falling apart. With the order to kill, the army of corpses begins their final march toward the target. Klein scoffs at the attempt, realizing they are foolishly trying to use his own magic against him. A glowing star and crescent emblem flares to life on his fist as he prepares for combat. The undead advance with blades ready, their mangled faces closing the distance for the kill. The leader with the glowing eyes does not even flinch, just drops a casual death threat. His opponent is completely caught off guard by the sudden escalation in pressure. A massive pillar of golden light erupts from the sky like a divine orbital strike. The impact zone turns into a meat grinder, sending the undead flying into the air. Garrison stands right in the center of the fallout, channeling pure holy authority. He speaks a single command, turning the light into a burial rite for the fallen. As the dust settles, he turns his attention toward Klein with a strange, haunting familiarity. The masked enemy is frozen in place, finally realizing exactly who just walked onto the field. Garrison steps into the light, confirming that the cavalry has officially arrived to take over. These are not just random soldiers, but the Pope's personal trio of human-shaped weapons. They are the only ones on the planet strong enough to wield the saint's ancient relic. A single blast from one of them carries the destructive force of an entire fortress. The masked figure can barely hold their ground, crumbling under the sheer weight of the holy power. Gear and weapons shatter like glass as the golden energy shreds through everything in its path. Fear is starting to set in for the attacker, who now knows they are way outmatched. The guy with the white hair is officially identified as the strongest of the holy trio. Garrison remains calm, repeating his promise that the threat to Klein is now effectively neutralized. Even as he walks forward, something else in the brush is still growling and watching. The battlefield is turning into a total chaotic mess as holy agents tear through the lines. A feral zombified beast lets out a final scream before charging headfirst into the storm. Garrison makes quick work of the first Necromancer with a brutal, heavy strike. He swings his glowing weapon in a wide arc, mocking them with a cold command. With those glowing orange eyes and that scarred face, he looks less like a savior and more like a nightmare. The Necromancers are getting their baptism of fire as their bodies hit the dirt. He keeps up his twisted sermon, acting like this slaughter is actually a form of spiritual cleansing. Every strike lands with lethal precision, and Garrison calls this entire massacre a simple act of mercy. He moves like a blur, cutting through the remaining cultists before they can even draw a breath. Holding his heavy, blood-soaked book aloft, he declares that this carnage is nothing but divine judgment. One of the survivors is losing his mind, wondering why a church agent is here at all. He is frozen in place, completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the power on display. Realizing the plan has gone off the rails, the guy decides to just turn and run. He scrambles away as fast as he can, still trying to process the absurdity of what he just saw. His mask hits the ground with a thud, but he is too terrified to even look back. He does not get far before a shadow looms over him and a hand pins him to the earth. The guy is held in a crushing grip, begging for his life as the end closes in. Garrison has no intention of letting him go, telling the guy to be grateful for the final prayer. He keeps talking about this judgment like it is some kind of holy gift being forced upon him. A final crunch signals that the last witness has been silenced for good. Garrison stands over the quiet remains of the battlefield, watching as the final bits of evidence hit the dirt. A severed eye rolls into the grass right up to the boots of someone else approaching the scene. Young Master Klein is caught in the open and looking completely out of his depth. Garrison does not even need a weapon to clear a path through the carnage. The sheer weight of his presence alone is enough to leave the kid paralyzed. 20 people were turned into scrap metal before the kid could even blink. Garrison looms over him with hands still wet from the recent slaughter. He claims he tracked the trace of necromancy straight to this exact spot. That smile on his face suggests he is far from finished with his investigation. He drops a heavy hand on Klein and starts probing for hidden magic. Garrison notes that the energy signature lingering here does not match the usual suspects. Klein is doing everything he can to keep his composure while being scrutinized. One wrong word and Garrison is definitely going to snap his neck right now. A rider breaks through the silence, charging toward them while shouting for the kid. Dunkel is clearly losing his mind seeing the state of the battlefield. Klein recognizes his ally, but he is barely holding onto his consciousness. Pushing this weak body to perform necromancy has left him completely drained. Dunkel pushes his mount to the limit to reach the kid before it's too late. He closes the gap, desperate to get between the boy and the scarred man. Klein snaps at the guy to stop yelling and just help him stay upright. Even in this state, he needs to know if the other target was eliminated. He confirms the kill, leaving no doubt about the fate of young Master Dalton. The assembly gathers under the shadow of a massive accusation regarding the attempted murder. A sudden outburst of violence breaks the tension as the room demands an explanation. Count Conwell is blindsided by the claim that his son was the actual assassin. The hall erupts in chaos while the grieving father refuses to accept these treasonous accusations. An official tries to steer the investigation toward the culprit instead of the dead knight. The investigators reveal that the suspect has remained perfectly consistent throughout their entire interrogation. Evidence of 20 mercenaries leaving the Conwell estate makes the assassination attempt impossible to ignore. Conwell panics as he realizes his own subordinates left a trail of breadcrumbs behind them. Skeptics in the room point out the absurdity of a non-combatant taking down a knight. Whispers circulate about the boy having 0 mana and no skill with a blade. Conwell realizes he is on the verge of ruin if the assassination plot is confirmed. He decides to pivot his strategy by attacking the boy's reputation and sanity instead. The assembly is reminded of the boy's bizarre obsession with being the legendary Archimond. Conwell argues that a delusional child is hardly a reliable witness for a murder charge. As the Count tries to paint the boy as a conniving liar, he is abruptly silenced. The room goes still as the person at the center of the controversy finally appears. Klein walks into the hall and immediately calls out the absurdity of the ongoing debate. He lays out the facts of the ambush and his survival through the priest's timely intervention. The Count screams that it is a lie, but Klein cuts through his panic with ease. Klein drops the facade and mocks the room by confirming the truth of his identity. Klein is still reeling from the weight of his vow to avenge his own death. He is dead set on purging the vermin who have tarnished his family name. He shifts his focus to the collateral branch bastards who dared to target him. A new arrival breaks the tension by stepping in with a formal apology for her delay. Leia of the Blue Holy Spear Knights marches in with her escort in tow. Klein recognizes her from the swordsmanship demonstration and wonders what she wants with him now. The authorities in the room clarify that she has full permission to be involved here. It turns out Dalton used to run missions under her specific order of knights. Leia has the perfect cover to insert herself into this meeting without any pushback. Her piercing gaze zeroes in on him with a focus that feels almost surgical. As she reaches out, he realizes he has walked straight into a direct confrontation. She catches him off guard by demanding a private conversation with him immediately. His father intervenes, deciding he will allow a short talk between the two of them. He tells his son to go ahead, though the boy is clearly feeling uneasy about it. Klein is annoyed by the knight's sudden intrusion into his business. He quickly regains his composure, realizing this might actually be a chance to turn the tables. He narrows down the potential reasons for her interest to verification, suspicion, or a test. He plays the part of the obedient son and agrees to the private meeting. He follows her out, fully prepared to face whatever game she is trying to play. The heavy doors close behind them as he decides to use her to his advantage. Leia makes her move, stepping into his space with the kind of authority that demands total attention. She stays silent for a long moment, clearly weighing how to approach this little interrogation. Without warning, she breaks the quiet by snapping at him to get his focus on her. She corners him against the wall and drops a loaded question about wanting to touch him. He is completely caught off guard, wondering if this woman has actually lost her mind. It turns out this is Leia Ren Polwyvern, a high-ranking noble and a legendary spear master. Her official military records prove she has been carving through hordes of monsters for years. She's used to standing on the front lines, staring down nightmares that would break anyone else. When she taps into her power, those blue eyes start glowing like a warning sign. She doesn't just fight monsters, she dismantles them with surgical precision and terrifying speed. During the Western subjugation, she was the only one prioritizing civilian safety while others faltered. She moves through combat like a dancer, ending threats before they even know she is there. She single-handedly wiped out every high-tier monster in the zone, making it look like child's play. With a resume like that, it is no wonder she carries herself with such cold, detached confidence. She does not have time for hesitation, snapping at him to stop lagging behind and keep pace. He tries to play along, but she immediately shuts him down, reminding him they are not actually family. He recalls being told she was his cousin through the Duke's second wife, but the math is wrong. Since she is from the first wife, they share no blood and are effectively complete strangers. She pivots to her real motive, claiming this is just personal curiosity, leaving him totally confused. Before he can process that, she grabs him by the collar, dragging him into her game. Leia leans in and drops the weirdest request, asking if she can touch him. Klein is left reeling, wondering why on earth she would even ask for that. Before he can figure it out, she just grabs his hand for herself. She starts running her fingers over his skin, noting how suspiciously soft and smooth they are. She mentions that even pro swordsmen usually have some kind of calluses from their training. She digs her fingers into his palm, claiming those specific pressure points never lie about combat. She presses him on it, point-blank asking if he has ever even held a sword. She brings up the contradiction between his pristine hands and his supposed survival against 20 mercenaries. She pushes the theory that he is hiding some kind of dark, monstrous power underneath. Klein yanks his hand back, finally putting some real distance between them to regroup. He decides to flip the script, acting defiant and asking if she thinks he is Archimonde. Leia realizes she hit a nerve, but she knows she needs to keep up the pressure. She figures that if she keeps pushing, he might eventually crack and give her the truth. She steps right back into his space and hits him with a taunting, confident challenge. She laughs off the idea, acting like the mere suggestion of him being Archimonde is ridiculous. She mocks his stature, telling him he is way too small to be a legend like that. Klein is completely blindsided, clearly not expecting to be insulted like a child. He stares back in total disbelief, his brain struggling to process the blatant disrespect. He gets visibly agitated, but she just doubles down, offering to repeat herself if he wants. She tears into him, pointing out his small build and lack of presence to seal the insult. Leia keeps digging at him, wondering how someone so pathetic could have possibly taken down a knight. She drops a weird curveball, offering him a kiss like it's some kind of reward. He's completely floored by the suggestion and does not even know how to process that. His brain is basically short-circuiting at this point, completely unable to make any sense of her. She keeps moving forward, dragging him along toward the venue while he wonders if this is a trap. Standing on the balcony, she starts to explain her weird behavior for the first time. She makes it clear that the real Archimonde would never act like the guy she is currently talking to. They finally step into the main hall, making their entrance in front of the entire gathering. Looking at the massive crowd, he realizes he was way too naive to think they'd just take his word. A guy in the crowd recognizes him, and he knows that claiming self-defense for that kill is useless. Delkin Conwell steps up, looking down at them with that classic arrogant authority of a high-ranking noble. Without hesitation, Klein draws his blade and points it straight at the Count, shocking everyone watching. Energy surges from the sword, signaling he is not here to play nice or keep his head down anymore. The room goes dead silent as the guests realize the second son is actually picking a fight. He calls the Count out by name, making it clear that he's done dealing with the political games. He demands they settle this the northern way, refusing to back down from the confrontation. He stares the Count down and formally declares a trial by combat to settle the dispute. The entire hall erupts in confusion as the gravity of his challenge finally hits the crowd. This ancient custom is simple enough, as the law dictates that the winner of the duel is right. The Count is sweating bullets, but Klein is not offering any excuses, just a long list of reasons to fight. He points out that the Count tried to frame him for a murder attempt that never even happened. The name Klein is just a placeholder because his real identity as Archimonde means nothing to him. He presses the Count to stop hesitating and finally make his decision on the trial. The crowd starts buzzing about the old tradition as the pressure on the Count keeps mounting. The Duke steps in to authorize the duel and declares that the winner gets the final say. With the old evidence officially wiped away, the Count realizes he has a fresh path to victory. Smelling blood, the Count probes whether he is really going through with this given his mana deficiency. The Count makes his move clear by announcing he will field a champion to finish the job. Klein is not fazed in the slightest and makes it clear the Count is already a dead man. They lock in the duel for 4 days from now, but the real plan is just starting. He views the Conwell family as nothing more than a convenient ladder to climb the power structure. It is time to dismantle the entire family hierarchy and build it back up from the ground. Someone abruptly cuts into his focus to shut the whole thing down. His brother storms in to demand if he has lost his mind over this deadly trial. The warnings about certain death fall on deaf ears as he brushes off the concern. He reminds his brother that the Duke has already signed off on the whole arrangement. His brother offers to step in as his champion, but he immediately shoots that idea down. The power of the North relies entirely on his father and his brother as the rightful heir. He tells his brother to get a grip because the plan is bigger than just one fight. Taking the fight for him would just hand the Branch families a legal way to kill the heir. Klein knows being the heir means his hands are tied, but he needs this win. Delane refuses to step aside and reminds him exactly who he is dealing with here. He remembers being so excited to meet his younger brother for the very first time. That was the moment he saw something special in those tiny hands reaching out to him. To his young eyes, he looked like an angel that he promised to always protect. He spent 7 years waiting for his brother to return only to face this deadly trial. Someone suddenly grabs Klein by the collar and cuts through his internal train of thought. The guy is actually tearing up while pleading with Klein to finally listen to him. He rests a hand on Klein's shoulder as if trying to ground him in reality. A messenger interrupts to announce that the Count has officially chosen his champion for combat. Klein and his companion immediately demand to know exactly who the opposition is for today. They learn his name is Randall, an excommunicated knight with a lethal reputation in battle. The tavern doors swing open and the atmosphere shifts instantly as someone enters the room. This knight was kicked out of the Empire for a very specific and violent reason. He pours himself a drink while the weight of his past crimes starts to surface. It turns out Randall suffers from an uncontrollable urge to kill anyone in his path. He sits there looking like a boss character from a dark fantasy game waiting for prey. The guy is already drooling over the thought of hearing Klein scream for his life. Klein keeps his cool and focuses on the reality of the threat now standing against him. Someone hands over the blade he requested as the final countdown to the fight begins. Klein accepts his custom blade with a warning that it will not last long. He knows this sword is a ticking time bomb the moment it hits Mana. He brushes off the risk and orders his people to head to the arena. Klein walks out to meet his fate with the weapon held ready in hand. The crowd erupts in disbelief as the young master actually shows his face here. Vips watch from above and laugh at the absurdity of the kid fighting himself. Doubts arise about his survival since he lacks the mana to face an Empire Knight. Even the onlookers wonder why the family did not send a real warrior instead today. Klein scans the massive arena floor to find his opponent waiting in the wings. He casts his gaze down and waits for the giant to finally make an appearance. A heavy shadow falls over him as he realizes the giant is already right there. Randall lands in the arena with a heavy thud that shakes the entire ground floor. The massive warrior sneers down at Klein to confirm he is the boy he is hunting. Klein notes that the giant is surprisingly younger than the rumors had originally claimed. Randall lunges to grab him and threatens to snap his neck like a dry twig. Klein moves with shocking speed to dodge the grip and put some distance away fast. The crowd loses their minds because they cannot believe the kid just bylaid on combat. The Vips demand to know if this pathetic display is all the kid has to offer. Randall grins because he is convinced the boy is already paralyzed with pure, unadulterated fear. Klein just sighs in annoyance because the guy actually managed to catch him off guard. Memories of that past shoulder grab still make him flinch without even thinking. The commander watches from above and calls the guy useless for relying on water torture. She stays silent for a moment and just watches the fight from her perch. When her subordinate warns her about Lady Hellion, she snaps that the woman is not her mother. She leans in with a sudden offer to kiss him if he takes down the knight. Klein ignores the distraction because he has his own agenda to settle right here. He tries to play off the awkward comment by complaining about a stiff neck instead. Randall slams a massive hand down on his shoulder right after he gave a warning. Klein tells the guy to back off and mocks him for having ears full of muscle. The jab about the Empire abandoning him hits the giant man where it really hurts. Randall growls back that the trashier the mouth, the more he is going to enjoy this. A massive shadow falls over Klein as the giant prepares a heavy, crushing blow. Klein quickly reaches for his weapon while the giant starts his downward swing. Randall puts his full weight into the attack and shatters the stone floor entirely. A massive shockwave tears through the arena and kicks up a cloud of thick dust. The giant pauses in the middle of the wreckage and realizes something is wrong. He finds himself clutching nothing but an empty coat while staring at the debris. The crowd goes wild over the raw power but then notices something is missing. Panic ripples through the spectators as they realize Klein has completely vanished from sight. Klein stands perfectly safe off to the side with his weapon ready for action. Klein realizes he cannot win this fight with brute force alone. He knows that trying to block those heavy swings would only end in disaster. The crowd is starting to whisper that he is basically fighting a death sentence. Everyone watching is convinced he is just walking directly toward his own grave. He remembers the warning that taking this trial was just a legal execution. The giant swings his blade with enough force to carve up the arena floor. Klein shifts into a focused stance and draws his steel at the perfect moment. Metal screeches against metal as he successfully deflects the massive blow. The giant tries to snatch him right out of the air mid-swing. He pivots around the strike and lands a quick counterattack before dancing away. Another overhead strike forces him to rethink his defensive strategy immediately. The giant shouts that running away is not going to save his life tonight. He drops the taunt that Klein should stop holding back and use his necromancy. The pressure mounts as the giant demands to see the power of the great Archimond. A sudden change in the flow of battle leaves the giant completely stunned. He realizes something has shifted in the air between them. Klein considers if it is time to just use necromancy and end the fight. The giant recoils as he feels a dark, chilling shift in the arena. The giant leaps back to reset his footing while Klein holds his ground. The spectators are baffled by the giant suddenly backing away from the fight. The giant shakes off the strange pressure, wondering what exactly just brushed past him. A dark phantom looms over the arena as if waiting for a command. Klein stands his ground while the heavy magical aura continues to swirl around him. The man watching from the side can only wonder what has gotten into Randall. Randall locks his focus in, completely tuning out the world around him. Klein cuts the tension by announcing he has no intention of using necromancy here. He insists that as a Rhineland he will win this fight using only his sword. Observers are stunned that he would willingly throw away his biggest trump card. The crowd goes absolutely feral as the realization hits them that he is fighting fair. One spectator is losing his mind with excitement, cheering for the raw trial of combat. The scarred man watching nearby realizes this kid really was not just bluffing earlier. Randall dismisses the strange energy, banking on his superior stamina and strength to win. He floods his body with red mana, relying on the Imperial style's raw output. The mana surges through his system, supercharging his muscles and sharpening every sense. With an explosive burst of speed, he launches himself directly at his target. He swings his blade with everything he has, screaming for the Rhineland to die. Klein dances through the air, parrying the strike with a clean arc of energy. His eyes lock onto the giant, reading the flow of mana in every movement. The giant crashes his weapon down with enough force to shatter the ground beneath. Klein weaves through the onslaught, seeing every incoming strike before it even happens. Randall lunges forward with a massive arm, calling Klein an annoying pest. He screams for the kill, putting everything into one final red-tinted strike. That lethal blow crashes down, tearing a violent glowing scar through the floor. The dust clears, and the space where Klein stood is completely empty. Randall realizes in total shock that his entire sword path was red instantly. Klein maneuvers through the air behind his opponent, blade held high for the finish. He mocks the giant, pointing out that such a large target leaves his back exposed. Klein executes the meteor sword, carving a glowing purple strike directly into Randall's spine. The crowd watches in disbelief, instantly recognizing the legendary meteor sword technique. Randall lets out a pained cry as the strike lands true. Klein smirks while his opponent gasps, wondering how this is possible without using mana. A nearby soldier stares at the display, struggling to process what he just saw. The commander stands there, completely stunned by the turn of events. Back at the estate, the Duke admits he would have normally stepped in himself. He tells his subordinate that intervening now would only ruin the family prestige further. The subordinate questions why he allowed the duel if Klein had no chance against a knight. The Duke explains he could not stop the boy who stepped up to defend his mother's honor. He laments his past failures, admitting he could not even save him from the monastery. The subordinate reassures the Duke, telling him he does not need to worry about the outcome. He keeps his focus on the match, watching closely as young Master Klein finishes the job. Klein unleashes a violet blast, proving he never picks a fight he cannot win. Bystanders are left stunned as they realize just how much Klein has truly changed. He reveals the secret of the Rhineland style, designed for maximum efficiency using 0 mana. Klein admits that while he lacks raw power, his technique is more than enough here. He dismisses his opponent as a non-threat, sending the guy into a total rage. The knight snarls back, clearly losing his composure as the duel turns against him. Randall resorts to his ultimate move, flooding the arena with a massive red aura. The crowd recognizes the danger, shouting out that his secret technique is finally unleashed. A lion-shaped aura surrounds the knight, meant to paralyze Klein with pure mana pressure. Klein refuses to be intimidated, calling out the desperate attempt with a cold laugh. The massive knight lunges forward, his red mana surging like a crashing tidal wave. Spectators scream in fear, convinced that Klein is about to be completely overwhelmed now. Randall commits everything to a downward strike, aiming to crush Klein under pure weight. The blades collide in a violent burst, creating a storm of sparks and friction. The secret is simple because the moment that heavy mana hits a specific point, it is designed to shatter the weapon entirely before the strike can even connect. True to his word, the metal of the knight's sword begins to crack under pressure. Randall falls for the trap, laughing as he thinks his brute force is finally winning. He mocks the breaking blade, completely unaware that his own weapon is failing him. Klein reveals the final piece of his trap, finishing the weapon built to hunt. Klein swings his blade with precision, severing the giant's hand in one clean motion. The massive limb hits the dirt, leaving the duel finished in a spray of blood. An authority figure steps in to call the match, his voice silencing the arena. The onlookers are stunned into silence as the reality of the outcome sinks in. A veteran observer notes that Klein's technique was flawless, even for a seasoned master knight. It is clear now that Klein baited his opponent into breaking his own weapon intentionally. The victory is officially declared while Klein stands over his work with icy, glowing eyes. The giant collapses, writhing in shock as he stares at the mangled stump of his arm. Medics scramble into the arena to stop the bleeding while Klein watches on, completely unmoved. The healers frantically attempt to stabilize the giant, ignoring the victor standing right nearby. Klein taps his chin, asking if the limb can actually be reattached to the body. The healers explain they can only provide basic care and will need to craft a prosthetic. Klein muses to himself that healing magic has barely progressed at all in 2 centuries. Klein catches himself acting cold and notes the concern from those watching his lack of empathy. He realizes he is still slipping into his old mindset, forgetting he is not Archimand anymore. He briefly contemplates faking a reaction to blend in, but ultimately finds it too tedious. Count Conwell loses his mind, screaming about the massive fortune he just wasted on a loser. Klein demands the Count honor the bet and admit his fault, but the man refuses outright. The Count bellows in pure rage, realizing his son is gone and his elite knight is finished. Klein cuts the argument short with a lethal strike that ends the Count for good. Delkin Conwell stares down the field with a cold and calculating gaze. The man is caught in a sudden surge of dark energy that forces him down. He's completely caught off guard as the pressure starts to crush his senses. Klein pins him to the ground and invokes the rules of the duel to seize control. He orders the man to kneel and publicly repent for his crimes against the North. Klein promises him that the weight of his own sins will break him apart soon. A massive spectral presence manifests behind the victim to drive the point home. The figure of a grim reaper looms over him as the source of this terror. The man completely breaks under the influence of the phantom power surrounding him. He finally cracks and admits his errors while pinned to the arena floor. Klein uses a necromancy spell to turn the man's own mind against him. The technique forces the victim to beg for mercy as his willpower evaporates. He spills every secret, including his insults toward the Grand Duchess, to save himself. The crowd watches in shock as a powerful noble figure completely falls apart. Klein holds the broken remnants of the blade as a sign of his total victory. He addresses the entire audience to declare that his reform of the family begins today. Standing as the undisputed victor of the trial, he asserts his authority over everyone. He identifies himself as the son of the respected Grand Duchess Claire Ray de Lacies. He adds his lineage as the second son of the North's greatest living knight. With his identity revealed to all, Klein Reinlant finally claims his rightful place. A mysterious figure in a stiff uniform steps out from the shadows of the doorway. Cardinal Morlock is deep in prayer, asking his god for resolve in the coming darkness. He continues his ritual, calling upon the god of light to witness his difficult path. Morlock steps out to meet Garrison, who has clearly been waiting for an audience with him. Garrison confronts the Cardinal about the recent Necromancer attack and demands a full status report. Morlock brushes off the concern entirely, claiming the whole incident was actually part of his plan. It turns out the Church has been coordinating with the Empire to deploy those Necromancers directly. By unleashing terror on the public, the Church forces desperate people to crawl back to them. Morlock argues that sacrificing a few lives is a necessary price to restore the Order's power. Before the conversation can go any further, a dark force blindsides Garrison with a brutal strike. A scarred man steps into the light, condemning the temple for compromising its values with heresy. Garrison finds himself being choked, gasping for air as he realizes the gravity of his mistake. The tables have turned, and Garrison is left begging for his life while staring into death. The holy statue of the angel stands broken, splattered with blood that ruins its pristine look. The scarred man continues his purge, lifting another priest by the throat with dark energy flowing. He drops the body and mockingly asks the dying man if he feels any better now. Palaminel watches the carnage and notes that Garrison has now killed more priests than any necromancer. Palaminel smiles, clearly enjoying the chaos and the revelation of what is truly inside Garrison. Garrison demands to know if this entire slaughter was orchestrated by Palaminel from the start. Palaminel admits he gave the order, but he is mostly here to deliver some new information. The elegant man pivots to the conversation, bringing up the target they have been tracking. A heavy blow lands with enough force to suggest someone is playing a dangerous game. He points out that necromancy leaves a distinct signature, catching the scarred man completely off guard. He produces a vial containing the residual traces recovered from the necromancer they just finished off. The vial contains two distinct types of magic, one for bodies and one targeting souls. When asked to clarify the soul archetype, the man confirms that the situation is more complex. He drops the bombshell that there were actually two separate necromancers present at the scene. A flashback shows a warning being issued to Garrison regarding the true nature of his target. The focus shifts specifically to the second son of the noble Reinlant family. He begins to reveal the shocking truth about what Klein Reinlant is actually hiding. While the group gathers, the red-haired girl rushes in to join the rest of the party. The young lord calmly confirms the suspicion that he is indeed a practitioner of necromancy. Outside in the dark forest, a hidden cave serves as the backdrop for the next development. Deep inside the earth, a pickaxe strikes a vein of crystal, triggering a sudden burst of energy. A laborer works away at the wall, unaware that he has just uncovered something he should not have. He looks up to find a massive clawed shadow looming over him in the dark. The realization of the immediate danger hits the miner as he stares down the looming threat. The entire cavern starts to cave in as the shadow exerts its overwhelming pressure on the structure. Back with the group, the red-haired girl stares at a stitched doll, fearing the worst for their situation. She realizes in frustration that she accidentally crafted the doll to look just like the young lord. A week after the trial, Klein's maid is busy playing with a doll that looks just like him. Klein reflects on his recent public wins, but he's still feeling stuck in a 15-year-old's body. He looks completely drained, and he's told to just get some sleep and stop messing around. The maid keeps teasing him for playing by himself, but Klein insists he is busy reading. She dismisses his book as just a simple novel, failing to see what he's actually studying. Klein knows the cover looks innocent enough, but the content inside is a totally different story. It's packed with dark secrets like magic circuits and necromancy notes disguised as casual reading material. He's currently capped at 11 skeletons, and he knows he needs way more for a real war. That priest is still out there hunting necromancers, so Klein needs to get stronger before he's found. While he brainstorms, someone brings in a report about some weird sightings happening down in the mines. The documents confirm that the undead have officially made an appearance inside the tunnels. Klein immediately jumps at the chance, deciding that real combat is the best way to level up. His contact is clearly worried about the high casualty count and questions if he can handle it. Klein thinks the mine is the perfect place to test his necromancy away from any prying eyes. He wanted to go solo, but the Duke insisted on sending an attendant to keep him safe. They set up camp for the night, and Klein tries to act normal despite being frustrated. The attendant offers him some food, and Klein plays the part of the polite young master. He keeps his true goals hidden behind a calm facade while the attendant stays close by. Klein starts experimenting with his magic while he pretends to just be eating his dinner. He accidentally incinerates his food, proving he successfully practiced his control right under their nose. Knight Commander Dunkel is clearly out of his element when it comes to basic survival skills. His companion shrugs off the awkwardness and tells him to just focus on the food instead. He mentions that after a decade on the run from knights, this campfire life is easy. They lock eyes for a moment, and the air between them gets heavy with unsaid things. Dunkel points out that the young master is hiding a scary amount of talent and spirit. He drops a bombshell theory that the boy might actually be the reincarnation of the legendary Archimand. The kid shuts that down immediately, forcing Dunkel to scramble and backpedal on his own guess. He explains the history of that name, which is basically synonymous with a massive undead massacre. Out of nowhere, the campfire erupts into a violent, massive pillar of flames that cuts them off. The fire roars with an unnatural intensity, turning their quiet camp into a chaotic, bright mess. Dunkel tries to blame the wind for the explosion, but he realizes instantly that something else happened. The young master goes completely cold, his entire demeanor shifting to match an immediate lethal threat. He snaps a final warning to never bring up that taboo name ever again in his presence. Dunkel senses the shift and checks on the boy, but the situation is already spiraling out. An inhuman screech tears through the air and Dunkel draws his blade to meet the incoming fight. Screams erupt from the nearby village as the night suddenly turns into a total slaughterhouse. The townspeople are scrambling for their lives as the undead flood the streets in a swarm. These things are not just shambling corpses, they are charging with a coordinated, malicious intent to kill. A flash of golden light cuts through the darkness as someone prepares to take them on. The fighter dives into the mob, swinging a blade charged with energy to carve through the ranks. Klein turns in a panic as an explosive sound echoes from behind him. Dunkel stands amidst the carnage after slicing through a massive, shadowy, dissolving beast. Dunkel remains perfectly detached as he questions his own actions in this hellish scene. He snaps out an order for Klein to start saving the surviving villagers immediately. A heavy thud marks the moment a reanimated villager's head hits the hard ground. The survivors realize they are being saved by the second lord of House Rhineland. Klein ignores the crowd to demand when this nightmare first started terrorizing the village. Dunkel recognizes the reanimation magic as the same technique used in his forest ambush. Klein reports that people started vanishing 2 months ago when the mine was restricted. The truth hits them both that these undead monsters are actually their own villagers. A desperate man lunges forward and grabs the young lord by his shoulders. Klein steps in to protect his master from the villagers' sudden, aggressive physical outburst. The man screams that they were ignored for months and only get questions now. The villager points toward the pile of corpses to highlight the severity of things. He reveals the monster Dunkel just put down was actually his own father. The grieving man breaks down and demands to know why they are suffering. Dunkel just stands there, cold and silent, processing the weight of the villager's accusation. A dark, fragmented memory of Archimand flashes through his mind like a bad omen. Dunkel finally looks up with a hollow, empty stare and whispers a single word. Enveloped in a dark aura, he tells the villager to shut up and denies responsibility. The weight of the moment hits home as realization ripples through the group. Klein snaps back that he did not turn these people into monsters and tells the guy to pick a better target. He tells his companion to step back while he starts channeling his own power. His partner is clearly caught off guard as Klein begins chanting an incantation for the lost souls. Klein calls out to the suffering spirits and promises to guide them toward the light. Crackling with blue energy, he commands the dead to follow his lead and find peace. The magic takes hold, pulling glowing spirits straight out of the bodies of the fallen. A silent wave of souls drifts upward, finally breaking free from their cursed state. The spirits look peaceful as they ascend, surrounded by ancient glowing text hovering in the air. Klein keeps his focus on the dissipating magic while symbols flicker all around him. He watches the last of the energy fade away and simply says that he understands. His companion is totally lost, but another voice identifies the technique as soul resonance. It's a legendary skill from the Northern Plague era used to lay the dead to rest. The local villager watches the lights vanish, finally recognizing the soul of his own father. The spectral image of the man dissolves into nothing but tiny glowing particles. The group stands in the quiet aftermath as the spirits drift off into the night sky. Klein and his companion leave the site behind, heading out toward the dark mountain range. A local points them toward the mine, warning them about the path ahead. His companion cannot help but ask what Klein actually discussed with the spirits during the ritual. Klein stays tight-lipped and deflects the question, leaving his true conversation a mystery for now. Klein finally reveals that the spirits were not just saying thanks for their peace. They were actually demanding that he carry out their final act of cold revenge. Dunkel stops him right there, clearly unsettled by the weight of that request. He warns Klein that claiming to be the reincarnation of Archimand is dangerous talk. Dunkel shifts the conversation and demands an answer to a much more personal question. He wants to know exactly who Klein is and where he truly came from. Flashbacks reveal the moment Klein Rhineland first returned after 7 years in the monastery. People were already whispering about the cursed boy who called himself the legendary Archimand. Most unsettling of all were those hollow, pitch-black eyes that looked devoid of life. The strange occurrences began shortly after his return with a dead cat found nearby. The kitchen staff were the first to panic when they discovered the first carcass. Panic only grew as more dead cats started appearing in the garden every day. By the time the 7th cat turned up, the estate was gripped in full hysteria. Rumors spread like wildfire that the young master was wielding dark, cursed magic. Despite the chaos, Klein just stares out the window, completely ignoring the whispering servants. Everyone wants to believe he is too young to be the dangerous Archimand incarnate. Yet the atmosphere in the estate has turned undeniably cold and heavy at night. A man walking through the halls hears something that stops him dead in his tracks. A single lantern flickers in the dark as slow, rhythmic footsteps echo through the corridor. He watches Klein walk away into the shadows, leaving him with more questions than answers. Klein slips out into the night while the storm rages through the trees. He carries only a single lantern to guide him through the pitch-black woods. A sword at his hip shows he is ready for whatever might be waiting out there. He follows the desolate brick path leading deep into the heart of the forest graveyard. A crow perched on a tombstone lets out a sharp cry as he approaches the graves. Someone is trailing him from the shadows and wondering why he chose such a dark place. The observer hides behind a grave while trying to figure out what Klein is actually doing. Whatever they see next makes them freeze in their tracks and break out in a sweat. A sudden flash of light blinds the area as the observer shouts out for the young master. Klein sits quietly on the grass surrounded by a pile of dead stray cats. He does not flinch, just explains that he is performing a funeral rite for the animals. He points out that a contagious disease killed them and could easily spread to others. He keeps working, noting that he needs to bury them before other scavengers dig them up. The observer tells him to stop and leave the cleanup to someone else, but Klein refuses. He insists that this is just a necessary task that someone needs to handle. The observer watches him closely, clearly processing the reality of the boy's quiet dedication. Klein suddenly stands up and draws his blade to demand the true identity of his follower. He cuts straight to the point by asking if the man remembers the first maxim of Berkel Rhineland. The observer recites the rule that a person is defined by their actions rather than their origin. Klein confirms that is the exact reason why a peasant became a commander and he survived his own past. Klein keeps the blade steady, putting the choice of loyalty squarely in Dunkel's hands. Dunkel looks rattled, essentially telling him to kill him if he thinks he is Archimand. The tension breaks as the blade is finally pulled back away from Dunkel's throat. Dunkel admits he still has his doubts, but he's willing to move forward. He draws a hard line in the sand, swearing his service to Klein, not some monster. Dunkel stays quiet, keeping his own thoughts under wraps for the moment. Klein shifts the focus back to their mission, casually brushing off the heavy loyalty talk. The torchlight flickers as they press deeper into the dark, abandoned tunnel system. The light hits the ground to reveal a gruesome pile of human remains and skulls. They stand surrounded by the debris of death, realizing this place is a total graveyard. The stench of rot confirms their suspicions that something dead is lurking nearby. 7 undead figures emerge from the shadows, making it clear they have company. Klein starts chanting a summon, preparing to counter the undead with his own power. Ethereal skeletons materialize out of thin air, ready to serve as his personal front line. Dunkel watches the summoning unfold, clearly stunned by the scale of the magic being used. With a command, the summoned skeletons launch themselves toward the encroaching enemy group. The bone warriors close the distance fast, their eyes glowing with a lethal yellow light. The 2 men watch as the front lines clash, leaving them covered in the aftermath. The skeletons tear through the opposition, cutting down the undead with brutal efficiency. Dunkel questions the existence of such powerful summons, but Klein brushes it off as standard. The skeletal warriors are cutting through the opposition with lethal surgical speed. The path ahead is blocked with bodies and the sounds of more incoming threats. Dunkel hears the guttural growls echoing from the deep darkness of the corridor. He warns there are 40 enemies ahead, but Klein is already bracing for impact. Klein begins a necromantic chant to take control of the battlefield's lingering energy. He forces the fallen soldiers to rise and serve as their new personal guard. Dunkel watches in silence as the dead are converted into allies under Klein's command. This is just basic necromancer tactics to turn the tide of a losing skirmish. Klein notes they finally have a fair fight before moving to the next phase. A sudden cry from the shadows stops the skeletons in their tracks momentarily. Klein orders the vanguard to charge and signals Dunkel to push forward with him. The group sprints into the abyss to collide with the waiting enemy lines. The skeletons tear into the opposition with unnatural strength and brutal clinical efficiency. Blue light trails mark every strike as the undead army moves as one unit. Klein stays focused on the tactical flow and barks orders to keep the momentum. The skeletons decapitate their targets with such speed that the enemy has no defense. The entire front line is being completely overwhelmed by this relentless, coordinated necromantic assault. Dunkel is struggling to process how low-level skeletons are moving with such elite precision. They are fighting with the discipline of a veteran army, carving through the opposition. The hallway is left silent, marked only by the rhythm of blood hitting the floor. Klein steps into a cavern littered with the aftermath of some dark ritual. His companion questions the scale of the massacre while insisting they stick together. The man pushes back, demanding Klein keep his word and trust him completely. They venture deeper into the complex, noting how far they have already descended. Wiping blood from his brow, the man asks how much further the path goes. A faint, ghostly whisper drifts through the chamber, begging for some kind of help. Startled by the sound, the man shouts out into the darkness looking for survivors. He finds a victim covered in blood who only has the strength to beg for death. The room is filled with villagers suspended by magical tethers like marionettes on strings. Klein realizes these are the missing locals, harvested as fuel for a forbidden necromantic ritual. A cloaked woman steps from the shadows, mocking him for knowing so much about magic. She explains that soul-returning art needs a high volume of corpses to function properly. She drops the bombshell that this is just standard knowledge for anyone in their circle. A hooded figure steps forward, clearly recognizing Klein as someone of significant status. She calls him out by his true title, Lord Archiman, the Devil of the Continent. Archiman stares her down, assessing the threat posed by this unexpected necromancer in the dark. Suddenly, a hand offers him a random cookie, cutting the tension with a weird, sudden shift. A voice congratulates the young master for surviving the trial by combat in the arena. The group moves on, leaving the confrontation behind to focus on their next objective. Klein stays locked on the mission, wondering what happens once they make their move. A mysterious blonde woman watches the trio leave from the safety of the shadows. She realizes she is hiding like a coward and is left totally flustered by her own behavior.